welcome to Hollywood and Sip. I'm your host, Kat Smith, and this is my first interview of 2021, by the way. I took a little break. So we're back and just in time for the Sonoma International Film Festival. So we're going to have some guests coming up, like our next guest, who is Nate Barlow, the writer, director, producer of A Brief History of Hollywood. And it is brief because it's a short film.
Yes, it is. Thank you for having me, Kat.
Yeah, welcome. And I like to start with this question with short films because I'm always curious. There's so many reasons for making a short film. Is this a standalone project or is this something that you think will become bigger?
This is a brief history of Hollywood is a standalone project. I do have other projects that deal with Hollywood history that may intersect with it, but it was never intended as a launch point for that. It was just coincidental that they have similar themes.
And is there a reason that you chose to do it sort of silent movie style?
Well, perhaps a brief description of the film makes sense first. It's a for those who have not seen it, it's a faux time lapse of the Hollywood sign, overlaid with all the technical advances in Hollywood. From going from sepia to black and white to color. The different aspect ratios that were introduced in the 1950s, 3D, you name it, it's in there. And so dialogue just didn't I toyed with the idea of having a voiceover, but I felt that the imagery itself was the key to the film, and that having a dialogue over that would actually have distracted because from the actual imagery, and I think that tells the story in its own right. I mean, there is sound, there's a musical score that evolved with the styles of the time, depending which decade you're in, and I felt that adds an element to it. But I thought having because it's not about people talking. So just a voiceover track on its own, I thought would have been a distraction, not a bonus.
Right. I think the way you did it was very clever too. And I think because because it's so visual, having the wording on the screen instead of a narration means that you won't look away and miss something.
I think so. I think I think it's less intrusive. I think it's needed because some of the stuff, if you're not familiar with the history of either the sign or Hollywood technical advances, would be very confusing. So it needs some little bit there. Plus, of course, there's the year in the lower right hand corner to give a sense of the timeline. But yeah, it keeps you on screen. It keeps your eyes focused because it is, it's an evolving shot, but it is essentially a single shot.
Right. Right. And just out of curiosity, was it? I feel like the background hillside was a photograph, but was everything else sort of computer generated, or did you mix
Yes.
actual photos in?
Well, what I did was I took some photos to establish it, and then and then I basically stripped out the Hollywood sign. I just took out the elements, rebuilt the background in Photoshop, and then the entire film is rendered in After Effects, which I literally learned on the fly to do this project. I had no experience in it prior to doing this. So that was it. So I'm sure at some points it's not the most elegant solution, bull in the china shop, but it got me there. So it is completely computer rendered. So it's actually not just an experimental documentary, but technically an animated experimental documentary.
Oh, how crazy! I would not be able to tell that it was your first time using that program. It was very well done.
Thank you.
And then, so why tell the story of a sign other than the obvious people like me don't know the history behind it?
Well, I guess it's because my own fascination with the sign, which I'm, when I first moved to Los Angeles, actually, even I was prior to moving here, I was out on a business trip. I was an engineer before I became a filmmaker. Had to see the sign. I saw the sign. And after which, it's like, I've seen the sign, been there, done that. Until the first time I was up in the Hollywood land development, for which the sign was, originally a gigantic billboard. And you get close to those, as close as you can get to the letters, I should say, because you're not allowed to get close these days. And you start to get a sense of just how big they have to be for you to see them that far away. And I just became fascinated. And I learned about the history of the sign. And I was fascinated by that, but that in its own right to me didn't seem to be enough of a story until I connected with the symbolism. Because this, for years, pretty much since Peg Entwistle committed suicide from the H, which is really looked at as the key moment as to the sign getting the symbolism of being connected to the Hollywood industry. It's as I said, it's a sign of the industry. But what I realized on top of that, and which is why I overlay the technical effects, it's the second level of the film, is that it really, the sign is not just the ups and downs of the sign mirror the ups and downs of Hollywood, the town, as well, and our country. When it's going through some bad times, as you see, it's actually when the sign is run down. And so I really realized that it's a symbol working at multiple levels. And that's why it's called A Brief History of Hollywood. In that case, in the title, it means not just it's the Hollywood, the sign, Hollywood, the industry, Hollywood, the town. And of course, the little tag is told by its most famous resident, which of course is the sign, is because that is Hollywood's most famous resident at this point.
Right, right. And it's almost 100 years old now. I think, is it 97? Am I close?
Yeah. It was finished in 23, so late 23, so yes.
Okay, yeah. And what was I going to say? Oh, I think that I'm not alone in this. For some reason, it's never dawned on me that it was anything other than an industry sign. I never put it together that it was actually the sign for a neighborhood. I didn't know it was Hollywood land first. And is that part of Hollywood still Hollywood land, or has that gone away?
It is still part of Hollywood land. There's this, if you drive up Beechwood Canyon, you'll see signs, old, I think there's an old metal plaque in some brick, but in the stoneway areas, and it's still called the Hollywood land area. I mean, as I said, it was a billboard, and it was a billboard that was only designed to last for 18 months. And
Oh, that's crazy.
now we're lasting on, nearly 100 years. I mean, and it was, when it was first constructed, it was telephone poles were the structure it was built on. Basically, just giant telephone poles, not deep embedded in the ground, seismic sturdiness, with 3x9 metal plates over it, and to provide the letters. And of course, obviously, that, as you've seen in the short now, the sign, for those who don't know much about its history, degraded a lot over the years. In the 40s, they took off the land. And just made it Hollywood. It was becoming more and more representative of the town and of the industry. And in the 70s, it was completely falling apart. And by 78 was just an absolute terrible repair, which is when they completely stripped it down and rebuilt it. Steel girder, embedded in the ground, superstructure, to make it something that will last and never, collapse that way. It had the potential to collapse because several of the letters had collapsed. Again.
And you mentioned briefly the actress that jumped off the H in, I think it was 1923. What can you tell us about Peg?
Well, Peg Entwistle, it was 1932, September 1932.
Oh, 32.
Yes. She was actually, despite many of the myths about her, she was actually a successful actress in stage. She was actually quite successful in New York. She had some history both in LA. Her family had family members here in Los Angeles, and she had come out initially to do a play out here. Things kind of that had run their course, as they often do in the industry, ups and downs. And she had a small film role, and in 13 Women, which was largely cut due to the censors at the time. Her role had some lesbian undertones, which did not go over very well, and so Selznick tried to get it stuff through but couldn't, and no one knows for sure why she did. Of course, everything, was a failed actress and was disappointed, and she was not an unsuccessful actress. She had quite a successful stage career, but for whatever reason, I mean, some of the stuff leads that she maybe was fighting issues of depression. She went up there that day, and of course, jumped from the H, and of course, that's what many people lead to, whether it's based on the mythology of her, being unsuccessful or whatnot, as the first person to really kind of see the sign for something more than it is, whether that's actually the case or whether it's just what's been, put upon the act. That's really kind of where it took new meaning, regardless of whether that meaning had any intent in her head or not.
Well, what kind of makes me sad about her story too is that, and also I saw a picture of her, and to me she reminds me of Kirsten Dunst. She had a very similar look, but it was sad that I saw in Wikipedia they have, kind of the nutshell version off to the side of the long story, and under under known for, it lists suicide by jumping off the Hollywood sign, and for her other names, the Hollywood sign girl. So that's sort of tragic in a way, but also kind of lends to the mystery of the sign.
Yes, it's definitely connects to its. I mean, it's definitely a huge part of the science mythology, and I've actually quite fascinated by Peg's life as well, and I've written a screenplay about her. That's where
Have you?
yes, that's where you talked about intersecting.
Yeah.
That's where the intersection is. It's not, it's not meant to feed that, but that's where the intersection arises because of my own. Her story is such a fascinating story.
Oh, for sure. While I was reading about her, I was thinking this would be a great movie. So good job. And then there's several pranks that come up over the years. And out of curiosity, when did you wrap up this film? Because I found one from a month ago that I want to ask you about.
I wrapped it up in finally. It took me a long time to render this in around September, October of last year.
So
So
you would think that stunts wouldn't be happening all the way up to 2020, or well, because you finished in 2020. It's 2021 now, and just a month ago, I found a video of um, a few people who had climbed up there to change the sign from Hollywood to Hollyboob. And there was some, I dug deeper because I thought it was funny that it happened a month ago, and the person who was reporting it said it was a stunt for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I'm like, but that's October. That's not a month ago. So I dug deeper and I found it was a couple of people who were unhappy with social media for censoring them. And so that was what their stunt was about. But there's been so many stunts over the years, some of them political, some of them just to do it. What are some of the things you discovered in your research?
but first, I have to say, I am so glad the Holly boob stunt occurred after I finished because really, that's the one I wanted to end on.
No, no.
So I'm glad it was actually afterwards because I would have felt compelled to include it, but really not the best place to end. Um, I mean, the first modification was the Leon Russell album cover, which was actually not so much as a prank, but as the push to save the sign. One of the restorations in the 70s, really, which were band-aids until the big rebuild in 78. And the classic one, the one that, really started it all is Hollyweed.
Hmm.
The first Hollyweed, because it was done a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And so, in some ways, I think that's kind of my favorite, just because I think it was clever. It was new. It was different. It was again taking the sign to a new level, and seeing its significance and using it in another way. So I think that's important in a way that many of the other ones are not. Some are quite in trying to find reference. Some of them are quite difficult because a couple were uh, taken down by daybreak. Those people went up early at night, and they were someone had the USC Wood, for example, was actually pulled down even before really anyone had a chance to see it, and it took me months to find a reference photo of low res, low grain, dark, like so that's what it was supposed to look like for that to actually to build around. Um, some are so there were some that were sanctioned. The Hollywood Cool World was a paid promotion. uh, Actually, the Pepsi logo on the L's was obviously a paid promotion, and that's when I never did technically find a reference image of. I found multiple reports of it, and based on that, I did what I read was done, and knowing what they were promoting with giant cans, I did my best to represent that as I could, but I never did find a reference photo. I collected hundreds of reference photos for recreating this. So
You would think that if you paid that much money to alter the sign for your business, you would have a photo of it.
you'd think,
You'd
but
think that.
but that was the day before. I'm sure they have some. but it wasn't covered enough in the press. And of course, it's, you know, before everyone in phones and they're taking photos everywhere on social media and everything being posted, that, you know, these days there's no way that you wouldn't be able to find something. But you know, even that was, you know, that was like beginning of the 90s. 30 years ago, that even that much was surprisingly difficult. I love the, again, it was a sanctioned one, but the Fox Broadcasting one, where they covered up most of the sign and you know, built and redid the three letters, is another one of my favorites, just because it was the scale and scope of it, you know, covering up that much of it. And again, it was one they actually had some lights on for the nighttime when, you know, after the original lights that were on the sign in the 20s and 30s fell away, you know, despite the fact that Hollywood, it's the industry in movies often represents the sign as being lit, and people think of it as being lit. It's only been lit a handful of times by spotlights, not actual lights on there. So ever since the 78 rebuild.
It's funny that you brought that up, because I found myself in my head having that argument with myself. Is it always lit? Is it sometimes lit? So it's cool that you brought that up, because I was having that argument in my head the whole time.
Yeah, perception. It's the perception of it is that it's lit, but you know, it was lit for 1978, the giant relaunch. 1984 for the Olympics. There was an illegal film shoot, lighting it for illegally lighting it. I'm not sure, you know, the film shoot as a whole may have been permitted for other things, but it definitely was not permitted to do that. It was lit for one of the repainting jobs. And then, of course, the Y2K sequence was obviously a huge deal. And that sequence alone took me 3 months to render, because that was most of the time I only had reference stills to use. There I had actual video. So I was
Cool.
recreating frame by frame what from multiple angles what was actually happening up there. I mean, not the entire 15 minutes, because it would have been longer than the rest of the film, but for the countdown, I did it. It's actually you know, time accurate 10 seconds and going frame by frame, which was a very painstaking. We couldn't let because of the way the lights moved, I couldn't let After Effects do it for me. I had to do every single one.
Right. And then I looked up, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his name. It's a very Russian name. A YouTube prankster, professional prankster, I think, because they even make movies. I looked up the footage on him, and you're right, a lot of them do get taken down right away, because his experience was fairly quick, but
Yeah.
there were cell phone cameras now, and, you know, news helicopters and things. But what I took away from that was watching him climb up that side. I'm like, why would you even want to climb that thing? It's huge.
Oh, I would love to. I would love to.
Would you?
I would do it in a second if I could do so legally. You know, and do the proper permits. I think it would think it would be magical. I would love just to be at the base of it, you know, looking up at the letters and see just how mammoth they are. And I feel very
yeah.
to the sign now from all the research I've done, all the work on this project, but to be up at the top and just be able to see from that view. I've been behind it, because you can there's a hike in Los Angeles that you can come up behind the sign, and you're at the top of the hill, which you can see, you know, top of Mount Lee, near all those all the television equipment, and you're actually pretty close. It's I think in the lateral, it looks to be maybe 20 feet, shows how steep it is there. That's only about 20 feet in front of you, but it's down below and it's fairly steep, and I'm not sure how many feet down. And so, you know, knowing what that view is like, but to be on top of the sign, I would feel if I had to went up any ladder, it would have to be the H for Peg, and just looking down from what would have been her perspective.
Right. Yeah. And I think it also shows how determined she was, sadly, because that's quite a process to go through. I mean, it's not an easy climb. And probably at that time, I mean, now you could see they had ladder rungs that you can climb up easily. Probably at that time, I don't know what they had for her to climb up.
There was some, because initially there were you know, there were the light bulbs, and it was supposed to be maintained, and the light bulbs swapped out in the original sign. As I said, you know, that slowly became less and less the case as it started, and as it outlived its original life, and people stopped caring about it as much. So there was some structure there, and probably even to do so, but yeah, it's not quite the the niceness that it is now. Let's put it that way.
Well, let's switch the focus to you a little bit. How did you get your start in filmmaking? As you said, you started out an engineer. What was the transformation for you?
Well, I've always liked acting. In fact, one of my earliest memories, I lived in East Africa for a couple years as a kid, and I was playing Achilles in a play of the Trojan War at my school in East Africa.
Oh,
But
wow.
I grew up. My father was a professor at Wesleyan University, and they have an amazing film studies program. So had the amazing good fortune to go see classic films on the big screen, not just on television growing up. So he would always take me, and he was pretty lenient as long as it was a serious film. Obviously one of the teenagers, I was in once I was hit teens, but it may have had some pretty adult content as long as it was a serious film, not some schlock horror bit, which I appreciate in my own right now. But like I saw Clockwork Orange on the big screen when I was 13 or something like that.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, so I'd always had this love with cinema. I don't think as a high schooler I was emotionally ready to make such a big jump. If I had to do the safe path, even though my dad had started engineering when he was in college and switched to music, and my grandfather was an engineer, so there was an engineering line in there. But my dad had done a switch. But I just emotionally I was too shy and not willing to take chances. But by senior year, I knew I did not want to stick with engineering, and I was taking filmmaking classes. I was taking acting for non-majors. I would always plan on going to grad school. I said, no, I'm not doing that. Since I'm not sure, I'll take this job offer I had off an internship, see how it goes. First few months, great. You're earning a lot of money. Awesome. Whatever. And then I was out in San Francisco on a business trip. I visited I had a cousin living out there at the time. And we went and saw a play where her great love was making masks. And they were using her mask. And being back in that theater setting just brought it all back. So the next month I was in LA on a business trip. I was making my few film contacts there. And from that point on, I was just saving and planning to go, and just came in, jumped in, had very slim contacts. So I didn't go for school for it, but just jumped in cold and took it from there.
And I think because of the recent news, it would be fun to bring up one of your projects in particular, because you wrote a movie that Meghan Markle starred in, Random Encounters. I looked up the trailer today and it looks amazing. Is it available to watch?
It's been in and out of various streaming services. So at this moment, I actually can't.
So I'll just have to search.
Yes, it's sometimes, and of course, as the writer, I'm not involved with as specifically the writer, out being on the producing side, I'm not involved with the deal, so I'm not sure what the current plan is at any given moment. Often the writers are the last to know. Yeah, it's been on in and out. It had initial release, then it's kind of quiet for a while. I think it was just kind of sitting on some services. Of course, the marriage, it got a DVD release in the UK. It was re-released. It got lots of attention then. And now, of course, it's been in and out of stuff again. But yeah, she was an absolute. I was on set a few times. I played a small role in it as well. But she was an absolute pleasure. I have nothing but the best to say about her.
And I don't know that I said the name of the movie. So it's Random Encounters here, and in the UK it's A Random Encounter. Is that correct? Yeah.
Correct. Yes, they switched it ever so briefly.
And then another fun project I want to know about is you directed a film that starred Adam West. Was he a lot of fun on the set?
Oh, he was great. It was a horror sci-fi anthology. So there were four of us, four directors, that each doing our own short basically. And then Adam West's story is the interconnecting piece. He plays this bookstore owner, and we co-directed that bit. And I wrote those words. And the best part was he said, "I love your words" to me.
Oh, that's amazing.
And he was fun. And if you ever get to see it, he's very, very calm, laid back, and there's this, and it was he was being himself in it. I mean, he was just the personality. Unless he was full method the entire time, that's how he was in person. Was how he played that role. This very gentle, and it actually added a nice kind of eerie creepiness to it. But he was an absolute pleasure, an absolute gentleman, and it was fun to work with. But I love your words. It was
And
very
he's such a distinctive voice. That will probably be ingrained in your mind forever.
absolutely. I can hear exactly the intonation, even to this day.
Well, we have been talking to Nate Barlow, the writer, director, producer of a short film, A Brief History of Hollywood. And if you're lucky enough to be listening to this interview in March, it's March, right? Yes, March 2021. You can see it as part of the documentary shorts program at the Sonoma International Film Festival. And that plays at 7 p.m. on March 24th. And tickets are available at sonomafilmfest.org. And if you're listening to this in the future, it's probably just got a life of its own and it's super popular and you can find it everywhere. But for now, I think what was so great about your documentary was it made me curious about a bunch of things I didn't realize I was curious about. And so for me, the journey went past the movie. I watched the movie, I enjoyed the movie, and then I thought, I want to know more about that. So I went on a little learning expedition from your film. So I think it brings more than just a brief history of the Hollywood sign. And I think you're right, it is the oldest resident of LA. So do you want to give us some information about how to find you and all of your other films and projects?
Yeah. Well, first off, I think a good one. That's what a good documentary should make you want to do, is learn more about the subject matter. It shouldn't be the end all and be all. I mean, it should draw you in that way. Um, my website is natebarlow.com. My name. There's the film is brief, just a brief history of Hollywood.com without the A. Just cut off the A for that. I was social media. It's either my name or it's because for some of the sites you can't go too long on what the name is, so I had to go HLLYWD sign film for the social media, and those are in those for that. In my other projects, should probably mention, I've got it might be of interest to your audience too, because of being in wine country, I have a documentary right now called The Water of Life that I'm a co-producer on, which is about the craft of Scotch whiskey.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's actually it's the wateroflifefilm.com, and it's actually we're doing a self distribution virtually. It's going on around the world right now.
I'll have to have you back on to talk about that one.
Yeah. So if you other projects, that's if you want to research that too, that's go for it.
Oh, and I totally forgot one other fun random thing I found. The trailer for Random Encounters ends with the Hollywood sign, and I thought, oh, look at the foreshadowing.
Well, actually, there was a scene that in the rewrites was cut, but that did take place up there. So it's, even though that shot in the trailer is just really more in the establishing of the universe of that it's taking place, there actually was a scene that was had to be written out for various reasons as the script evolved, that did once take place up there, connecting to having had done that hike and just knowing that view and seeing that. So yeah, so everything ties around. At one point, when I was writing various things, I would try to drop, kind of do the total mixed universe thing, where there'd be a hint to every other project in there. But sometimes, as things got further into like different times and different projects, I realized that wasn't always going to work out.
Right. Yeah. Well, I love it. I think everybody else will love it. And it's one more time. It's called A Brief History of Hollywood, and it's in the documentary shorts program. So good luck. And too bad you can't be here in person, but
I love
it's still a
Sonoma.
great festival.
I wish I know. I submit because I mean, just because I love Sonoma. I've been up a couple times, and I love wine country. And my wife and I dream of owning a winery someday.
Well, we'll come visit you at that winery. So we'll
Yes.
dream it with you. Thank
Excellent.
you so much for chatting today.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, bye.